Hey y'all, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to check out another one of my videos. And in today's video, I want to go ahead and continue my ranking all the palettes that I have in my collection from a certain brand. And we're going to continue it with JUVIA'S Place. JUVIA'S Place I have a pretty big collection of, I think it's a 10 or 11 palettes. I don't have all their palettes obviously because they've come out with way more than that, but I have a pretty big collection and it's one of the first indie brands that I actually really delved into and fell in love with. So it's got a lot of nostalgia for me. So I thought it'd be fun to sit down with you guys and share with you guys my ranking for all the palettes that I have in my collection of my JUVIA'S Place palettes and let you guys know which ones are at the bottom and which one is my top favorite palette that JUVIA'S Place has launched that I have in my collection. And you guys will have to let me know if you want to go ahead. You can leave your comments down below and see if you're right, but let me know if you can guess which palette is my #1 favorite when it comes to JUVIA'S Place palettes. I feel like everyone's going to guess it correctly, but let me know. But anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and just hop right into it, and I'm going to share with you guys all of my JUVIA'S Place palettes. We're going to start at the bottom and share with you guys my least favorite, working my way all the way up to my most favorite JUVIA'S Place palette. Okay, coming in at the very bottom is going to be a palette that I actually decluttered in my last palette declutter video, and this is the Rebel Honeys palette from JUVIA'S Place. And the reason this is getting so low is just because it's a very kind of like one-trick pony. Yes, I do enjoy these colors, but it just didn't blow me away. I wish this had a little bit more depth in it, and then maybe this shade had a little more depth as well, just so there'd be more difference between all of the mattes. I felt like these two were just very, very close or kind of too similar, and this one I just wanted a little bit more depth. So there were just little things about that I didn't love, but I did create one or two eye looks that I really did like. But when push came to shove and I did my palette declutter, I was like, you know what, I can get rid of this and not miss it. So I decluttered it. So I still have it in my collection because I'm still working at finding it a new home and whatnot, getting it out of my collection. But since I still have it, I was like, let me go ahead and just pull it out and show you guys in this video. But yeah, this comes in at the very bottom of my countdown. Okay, next up is another palette that I decluttered, and this one, not gonna lie, I'm having a little bit of regrets. I've been thinking it over, but anyway, this is the Nomad by JUVIA'S Place, and I figured this should come next because, like I said, I did declutter this in my palette declutter, but when I pulled it out for this video, I was like, why did I declutter this? Like, I like these tones, but I think the reason I decluttered it was because I wasn't crazy about the formula. That's the only reason I can think of. I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch my palette declutter because I'm like, why did I get rid of this? This is like a neutral palette that I do really like. It's like, you know, grungy in my tones and all that, so maybe it had to do with the formula and that's why I got rid of it. I don't know. I'm having a lot of mixed emotions here, so you might see a video of me changing my mind video coming up soon, and this might make an appearance in there, but for the sake of this video and ranking it, since it is technically decluttered in my collection, it's going to come in next because obviously I got rid of it and I put it in my to declutter pile, but having conflicted emotions now. Maybe accidentally. Maybe it was an accident in that video. Wouldn't that be crazy to go back and watch? So next comes the Rebel Grays palette, and this palette's coming up next mainly because I just wish there was more with this palette. Yes, it's a quad, you can't get that much, but I mean, these two shimmers are literally the same on your eyes, and then this shade right here is like a satiny color. That's kind of very similar to here, just not as, you know, impressive of a, you know, it's not like a shimmer, so it's not as impressive on the eyes, but they're all just like, these three are just so close. I'm just like, what is that? Like, give me a little bit more. So I was just bummed that there wasn't more. Like, yes, you can give, you know, a little quad gray tone palette you could have done a lot with, but with two of the shimmers, I mean, both of the shimmers just looking identical and this shade just being, I don't know, I never enjoyed using it. It was just kind of like, what is this palette? So coming in at the bottom, but I do remember keeping it because it is a gray toned quad and I don't have many of those in my collection, so I want to hang on to it for now. But I did just pick up Playing in Makeup by Yolanda gray toned palette. It's a 6-pan palette, but I feel like it's gonna kick this one out of my collection pretty soon because Playing in Makeup by Yolanda, she does not play around when it comes to the quality of her shadows, and there's actually like a nice mix and variety when it comes to grays, so I'm excited to get into it. But anyway, that's not the point of this video. This is coming in next because it lacked a lot for me. Next up is going to be JUVIA'S Place, the Rebel Mints palette, another little quad. This one was one of my favorites out of all the quads because it was a very kind of minty, very pastelish type of little quad, and I like that you had the blues on this side and the more minty kind of greens on this side. And so using this with another palette, I know I would really enjoy and just have a lot of fun with it because the quality of this is very nice. You got two mattes, two shimmers. They're, you know, nice. There's a nice variety when it comes to this quad. So this quad by itself, like as a standalone, sure, I could get one look that I probably probably would really enjoy, but as a companion palette, that's where it kind of has more sense to me in my collection, and I would, you know, get more use out of it and just enjoy it more. But if you're someone who like wants these kind of pastel tones in your collection, you can pick up this quad and have a nice matte and a nice shimmer. And for me, the only thing that's lacking is just to have a deeper shade for the outer corner, which you can pull from another palette and whatnot. But overall, I really did enjoy them. And the shimmers too, this one has like a duochrome shift to it. It's so beautiful, very nice, very easy to apply, very blinding. So definitely much higher than the other quads just because it stood out to me so much more. Alright, next up is going to be the Masquerade Mini by JUVIA'S Place. I think this is the first palette I ever purchased from JUVIA'S Place. This started it all, and this blew me away back then, but now when I look at it and I open it, I'm like, those are a lot of neutrals in there, Katie. Like, wow. And when you look at the like the color, a lot of them are just shimmers. These are all shimmers. This is a shimmer. This is a shimmer. This is a matte with sparkle, so borderline. But yeah, the only kind of colorful mattes is this shade. This has a glitter in it as well. This has glitter in it. So I don't know. I was just surprised as I was looking it over this morning. I was like, wow, that's a lot of browns, Katie. But it's a great little segue palette because obviously it worked great for me because when I was first getting into indie makeup, I was not comfortable with color yet. So this palette allowed me to play with color and still feel very comfortable and kind of have those neutral browns to work with and do a pop of color on the lid. So always a palette I think of and recommend for that kind of starter palette. If you're someone who's into neutrals and want to dip your toes into color, this is a great one. But for me now, being so much into color as I am now, it's just not landing that high because there's other palettes that have more color, more pop, and more fun and creativity within the palette. So the Masquerade Mini is getting kind of towards the bottom. Okay, very last for the little mini quads, this is the Rebel Army palette. This palette obviously is getting the highest out of all the quads because it's a nice green palette. It's got that grungy tones to it. I wish this, again, this is one that was definitely lacking when it came to the mix that they put in here, because these two are just like, yes, they're different. One's more green, one's more brown, but they're so very similar. And then these two, it's kind of like, okay, like I guess they're different, but you could have put more exciting type of grungy greens in there, like a really blinding one instead of this dark tone that you could used as an inner corner highlight, or like more of a duochrome type of grungy green, kind of like with the Mints palette. That was so beautiful, would have made for a gorgeous inner corner highlight. But this shade is so dark, and honestly when you put it on your eyes, it just looks like this shade with a little bit of shimmer to it. So it just kind of felt repetitive in that aspect of it. But as it is, I do enjoy these tones, and this is again a palette that I would enjoy using with another palette to really bring in the creativity and being able to get different type of looks with this palette. But as it is, this shade is really pretty. The mattes are very nice. They work very well. This shade is the only one that's kind of like, it really could have been anything else and I would have probably been happier with it. But overall, I do like the tones. The quality is nice. So as a companion palette, it is a really nice little quad. So I am ranking it relatively high, kind of like in the middle of this countdown. All right, next up is going to be the Wahala Translation Drama Palette from obviously from JUVIA'S Place, but the JUVIA'S Place Drama Palette, or Wahala Palette. I did a multiple looks with this palette. This has glitters in it, I think just 3. 1, 2, 3, and this one's like a multi-chrome, I believe, and then it has some duochromes or multichromes with these two shades up here. I forget if they're full on like a multichrome shift or just kind of a duochrome. Anyway, it's got some more interesting, unique, and creative type of, you know, shimmer shades for your lid, or, you know, just sparkle for your lid. But anyway, as a whole, this palette was nice. It definitely gives you a lot of variety because it is such a large palette, and it gives you a decent amount of color and pop and whatnot with these matte shades. I definitely had fun kind of seeing what I could get from this palette. But when we're talking about like kind of my favorite type of palettes to really dive in and create really fun, colorful looks, that's where the other ones obviously beat it out, and that's why this is landing where it's at in the countdown. But as a whole, it's not a bad palette. Again, one of those palettes where I feel like if you're someone who's very comfortable with neutrals but you're wanting to dip into color, you got that in here because you still have those neutral tones to stay very comfortable, but you have the pops of colors, and this one has more pops of colors for your crease as opposed to your lid, because the lid shades are more like neutral tone downish, and the crease is where you can really pop and, you know, have the fun with color. So anyway, just an observation I'm making. And then obviously, as I said, it has some multi-chrome or duochrome shifts and some glitters to play around with as well. But overall, it was a nice palette. I did have fun with it, but it just doesn't land as high because there are other palettes that JUVIA'S Place has launched that I love a little bit more. All right, next up, what is this? Top 4. This is the Magic Mini by JUVIA'S Place, and this was actually gifted to me by a subscriber. I always think of her every time I see this palette. But this palette right here was a lot of fun as well, and I like this one more than the others because, yes, it's got the neutral tones, but I really appreciated that it had depth with these these two, and they weren't just like a brown or a black. This is like a purple and a blue. So I really was able to go for the depth here, and then you still have a little bit of creativity, not a ton when it comes to the mattes up here. And then the shimmers were all just very beautiful. I just remember having a really fun time when I was using this palette. Again, one of those palettes where if you're super into neutrals, it's a great segue palette and something you can feel very comfortable with, kind of putting a little pop of color. This green was so bright, so like Christmassy green. And this shade Nubia, I remember really enjoying it. I want to say I've done palette bingos with this palette. I feel like I remember something like that, or I've at least featured it on my channel with a tutorial in the past. So if I remember, I'll try to link it down below in the description box. But as a whole, just a really nice palette, a nice array of colors. Again, I love the depth, and I think that's why it's landing so high, because the other palettes that I've talked about, yes, they were bigger palettes, had a lot of creativity, but when it came to the deep outer corners, it was either just like a brown or no really true deep rich colors. And I just love the richness in these shades specifically, like the blue and the purple. They're just so deep and so rich, so lovely. So the Masquerade Mini by Juvia's Place is definitely a good one. Okay, next up in the countdown, number 3, this is the Warrior 3 by Juvia's Place. I keep saying by Juvia's Place just because I'm reading the title, but like that's the most unnecessary thing I could say, because obviously this is all Juvia's Place palettes. But anyway, here's what it looks like, and this palette gives me the depth that I really enjoy, but is not getting as high as the other two because the tones in here are a little bit more like grungy and deeper, so I found it a little bit more challenging to create looks, and to create looks that I felt like, you know, really were cohesive and whatnot. And also the two shimmers, I don't know, we're just a tad bit limiting for me for whatever reason, but as a whole it's a very, you know, challenging and creative palette. Obviously it's getting pretty high in my countdown at palette number 3, but the other two definitely I just enjoyed a little bit more, because I mean obviously there's nuances about it that I love a little bit more, and this one, when I was thinking about it and trying to decide where it landed, it definitely, I think 3 is a great spot because it has a lot of colorful options when it comes to the mattes, so easily beats out the palettes we just talked about. But when I'm actually looking at it and remembering the looks, there's a lot of depth in here. Yes, there's some lighter tones, but there's a lot of like depth and grunge in here. And then the only two options for the shimmers, like they're not super light and bright like this one is, but this one, I don't know, is a little, I don't know, just kind of muted and whatnot. So as a whole, it's a great palette, it's a great, you know, color story, and I do remember enjoying the looks that I got out of it, but definitely doesn't beat out my number 2 or number 1. So number 3 is where it's landing at. It's a really nice palette. Again, a great palette, you know, to have if you're wanting to use it as a companion palette with other shades, because you got kind of like one of each color. It's kind of a more grungy feel to the whole the palette as a whole, or you can use it as a standalone, because that's what I tend to do with my palettes. So I remember creating a lot of fun looks using this as a standalone by itself, and this shimmer definitely was my favorite to use out of the palette. But as a whole, a really nice palette, and I had a lot of fun with it, so getting it towards the top at number 3 in my ranking. All right, number 2, this is the Zulu by Juvia's Place. This palette, I remember having such a great time with it, and I also remember really enjoying this purple, which at the time was a little bit rare to find a really good purple in a palette, because I feel like this shade of purple that brands were doing was just always like giving me so much trouble and like patching and whatnot. I remember trying the ABH, oh, what was it? It's the one that had obviously a purple shade in it. It was like the white and blue packaging. Oh my goodness, I am totally blanking on it. I don't think it was the Norvina palette. I'll put the title here, but I remember testing out that palette, and I remember struggling so hard with the purple in there, and I pulled for this palette to fix the look because it was so bad. So this definitely stands out in my mind as being, you know, a really nice palette, a really solid purple. But also with this palette, I love these two shimmers so very much. Obviously, nice mint, a nice, really gorgeous green, and then the matte shades in here. I love yellow. I love this kind of mustardy yellow. I love this orange. I remember using these 3 in a really fun, just kind of neutral orangey sunsetty look. Had a great time with it. Again, great time with the purple, the pink, just all the colors in here. Maybe just the pink was the only one that was kind of like a throwaway because it didn't stand out to me, but it was a good inner corner highlight, I'm sure. So overall, just a lot of great memories with this, so had to rank really high. Definitely a good palette, and when I'm thinking over all my favorite palettes of Juvia's Place, it had to rank very high because it's one of my favorites. Not my number 1 favorite, but my number 2 favorite. All right, you guys, did you guess it? You'll have to let me know. Did you guess this? My number 1 palette out of all my Juvia's Place palettes is the Tribe palette. Is it obvious? I know it probably is. This palette, whenever it launched, just stole my heart, and Juvia's Place has not launched a palette yet that has trumped this palette in my heart, because the tones that are in this palette I just love so much. You got a really great dark deep green over here that's just so beautiful. This shade also, while it's a shimmer, is gorgeous and deep and dark, and I remember enjoying using it. And then these two are like the stars of it for me, like this nice bright lime green. This is more of a deeper true lime green. Oh, they're just so beautiful. Using these three together was stunning, but then also these more orangey brown tones over here were absolutely beautiful. I remember this shade having a bit of a duochrome aspect to it, just being so blinding and beautiful. Great inner corner or great all over the lid. Yeah, I just remember each shade in this palette I loved. I love this kind of like dirty, weird type of brownie color over here. What's it called? Ashanti. This shade I remember enjoying so much as well. It's just a unique type of brown that I think is just so fun when mixed with all of these tones. So every shade in here in this palette I absolutely loved. The ratio of matte to shimmer I really did enjoy as well. I like the variety of the shimmers, the variety of the mattes. It was just a stunning winner in my mind, and honestly looking at it, it's like I want to use this again because I loved it so very much and had such a great time with it. Yeah. I just could go on and on about how much I love this palette. So easily it had to get number one because, as I said, each shade in here I absolutely love, and the ratio of shimmers to mattes I absolutely love. So easily there's no cons in this palette for me. So easily gets the number one palette from Juvia's Place. I don't think they sell it anymore, which is such a shame, but I'm glad to own it, and it's never going to be leaving. Okay, so those are all my Juvia's Place palettes and the rankings for them. You'll have to let me know what you guys think of this video. I have been wanting to do this type of series on my channel where I take my collection from a specific brand and rank all of the palettes that I own. I've already shared with you guys Menageries. If you missed that, I'll leave it linked up here. But I ranked all of my Menagerie palettes from best, or from worst to best. So this is kind of the start of a new series that I'm slowly going to do over the course of time. Like, I don't have a ton of brands that I have enough palettes to do this with, but for those brands that I do have a good decent stack of their palettes, I thought this would be fun to share with you guys. But anyway, with that said, that is going to do it for me. Thank you guys so very much for watching as always, and as I always say, if you want to continue getting more content from me, I'm over on Instagram. I'm LadyKatie92 over there, and I post reels, up close eye pictures, tutorials, all that sort of thing. And with that said, I'll see you guys very soon in my next video. Bye guys.